about teaching and working virtually, and provide a listing of current institutional responses to coronavirus. The current list of resources is just a beginning. It needs your additional contributions and expertise. When you visit the site, there is some instruction on how you can add additional resources to it. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mark Locklear, to lead today's webinar. Mark has been a web developer at the eExtension Foundation since 2014 and primarily focuses on eExtension's legacy applications, as well as supporting eExtension staff's internal tools such as Zoom and G Suite. Mark is also an adjunct community college instructor where he teaches web development and programming. And Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Outstanding. Thanks so much, Aaron. Hopefully you're seeing my screen here. Let me.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Great. Do one more thing. Go full screen. Okay. Thanks, folks. All righty. Welcome. Many of you, I haven't been doing as many webinars for the last 6 months or years, so I'm sure there's a lot of friends out there that I haven't seen in a while. So welcome. Good to be online with you again. Maybe it's unfortunate in some ways that we have to meet this way, but as Aaron said, we're really focusing on virtual work and helping folks be able to do their work, be productive, not only with your work, but your sort of your personal life too. And so I think all of these tools are going to allow us to do that. So again, as Aaron said, my name is Mark Locklear. I'm a web developer here with at the Extension Foundation. Just a little about me. I've been working fully remote with eExtension as a web developer since 2014. So going on six years now. I help maintain the legacy apps here, so a lot of coding and more technical type things, but then also support eExtension staff with helping manage Zoom and just all of the virtual work that we do. So the way we're going to do this, I've got sort of 3 areas that we're going to talk about in general. I want to keep this to around 30 minutes or so because I really want time to address questions. I know many of you have a lot of questions around hardware, software, networks, all of those things. So I really want to give you all a chance to ask those questions. So I'm going to try to limit it in the amount of time to actually speak on those things. So here's just a little map just to give you a sense of the eExtension staff and sort of where we're spread out at. We've actually added since, this is a slide I created last fall, but we've actually added folks since then. So again, we're a fully virtual organization spread out all around the country. So we use these tools all the time to get our work done. So the agenda generally is going to go something like this. I'll talk about setting up your home office. I've just got a single slide, just a few points on how administrators can help support their employees' work online. And then I'll get a little more in the nuts and bolts of hosting online events as well as just general meetings that you may have. I'm going to also keep this sort of, I'll mention Zoom a lot because Zoom is what we use here. And I know many universities around the country that you all are associated with probably have Zoom and support Zoom and have Zoom licenses, but I'm going to try to keep it software agnostic as much as I can. So a lot of the things I'll be talking about will apply whether you're using Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft 365 has a lot of these tools too. So I'm going to try to keep things as broad as I can, but a lot of the stuff I will be sort of referring to specifically that Zoom supports. Okay, so let's start out with a poll first. Let's see, here we go. So you should see a poll on your screen. So how has the coronavirus affected your work so far? And this is specifically your work, not your life. I know, I think most of us probably at this point would say the coronavirus has had a major impact on your life, but just this is sort of specifically referring to your work. How has coronavirus affected your work? None yet, but you expect it will, only slightly, and then major impact. And I sort of, I'll be clairvoyant for a second and guess that it's probably going to be a major impact for most of us, but I think it's nice. I'll be sharing the results of this as soon as we're done so you all can see it too. But sometimes it's nice to sort of know that other folks are going through this same thing too. So we'll just take another 5 seconds for folks to respond. Okay. So I'll end that, and then I'll share the results, and hopefully you can see the results there. So you can see, yes, for 70% of you, the coronavirus is having a major impact on your work, and that's no surprise. I think almost probably 90 to 95% of the people in the United States at this point would say it's having a major impact on their work. At least half of the states have shut down schools. I'm in North Carolina. North Carolina canceled all of its public schools this past weekend. So I've got a 5-year-old daughter. She's been at home. Myself and my wife are trying to balance having her at home and not having her sit in front of the television all day to try to keep them engaged and at work. So yeah, that's been a major challenge for us. Okay. So another poll here, how prepared are you to work remotely? See if I can get my, Zoom's not wanting to communicate with, cooperate with me here. Okay. So we launch this poll. How prepared are you to work remotely? So the options here are no problem. I'm already working remotely, mostly prepared. I work remotely regularly, somewhat prepared. I'm managing, but I have questions. And then not prepared at all is the other option I've got. So wanted to put this in just to give us a sense of what folks are, where folks are struggling at. Again, as I said, at the extension, we're virtual all the time. So obviously this has been not as much a disruption for us, but again, we've been inundated the last week with many of you are coming to us asking for help with either working remotely or trying to manage remote events. So it's even for us, it's changed how we're working and what we're focusing on. Okay. So I'll end that poll and then I'll share the results. So actually a pretty good mix here. I didn't know how many folks would be not prepared at all, but looks like the majority of you are somewhat prepared. So you're managing, but you have questions. That's not surprising really that we're sort of at that point. Most of us probably do work from home, even if it is just email and things like that. So I think the transition probably for a lot of us is maybe some of those tasks that we would go into the office for, staff meetings, those kinds of things. You're maybe looking at trying to move those into a virtual environment. So thanks for sharing there. So let's see if we can go back to presenting here. Okay. And so I just created this slide. This was funny. I in the description of the webinar, I initially had in preparation for possible disruption of work due to COVID-19, this webinar will address topics related to working from home and virtual event planning. Well, so I just created this 5 days ago. I started working on this, I think Friday of last week. But at this point, to say in preparation of a possible disruption of work, I think it's fair to say that we all have had a disruption of work at this point. So at this point, remote is the new normal. I think at this point, maybe 2 weeks minimum is what we're looking at, but it very well could be longer than that. All of the direction we've gotten from the CDC and those folks say that we really haven't seen the worst yet. So I think that for the time being, remote is going to be the new normal, and we need to sort of accept that as a fact. And then from a technical standpoint, say, okay, what do we need to do to continue to be able to do our work and be productive? And I'm sorry, let me say real quick. So if you have questions, please put those. If you have any formal questions, put those in Q&A. I think that's maybe the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you put those in, that puts it in a queue for us, and we're able to monitor that. We can also mark that question once we've been answered. Larry Lipke is online with us. He's going to be monitoring Q&A. He may be answering some of the questions by by text, and then we'll also maybe address some of them live so it can help other folks too. And then any general conversation, I'm seeing a whole bunch that's going on in chat now. Any general conversation you want to have in chat, feel free to do that there. I'm not able to sort of monitor those things, so Larry will be watching both of those. But again, if you have a formal question that you'd like us to address online, please put that inside the Q&A. We'll also be retrieving reports after the webinar so we can go back and sort of look at some of those questions. And that's going to help inform some of the work we'll be doing going forward with e-extension, maybe some of the services that we're going to provide or some of the topics we'll address going forward. So certainly share as much information as you can there. All righty. So the first thing I wanted to sort of mention was if you've got, what is your situation transitioning from your sort of normal work environment to working remotely or working from home? And sort of put it in these three buckets here. So if it's a new computer, that's probably going to be the most disruptive for you. So, and I'm just thinking of a scenario where maybe you have a desktop machine at work, you're not able to bring that home, and you've either been issued a new laptop, or maybe if you're a manager, you're thinking about maybe purchasing and allowing people to use laptops. That's going to be the most disruptive. In that, you've got a new system that's got to be set up and configured. You think of all of from a password management standpoint. I'll talk more about that later. But sort of bringing a new computer up and getting it online and getting it into your normal workflow is probably going to be the most disruptive for you. Sort of the next moderate amount of disruption is going to be a desktop move. So maybe you've decided I've got a desktop computer at work, and I'm able to take that out of the office and take that home with me. That's sort of going to be the next level of disruption. Sometimes there's some hardware issues where maybe you're taking the CPU itself but not the monitor. You need to find a compatible monitor, those kinds of things. But I've sort of got that on the moderate level of disruption. And then obviously if you've got a laptop, if a laptop is normally what you work from and you can take that home, that's obviously going to be the least disruptive for you, just because obviously it has all it has all the normal programs that you're going to use in your daily workflow. If there's any local files or anything like that, those are already going to be on that laptop. So that's going to be the least disruptive. Okay. So let's talk about remote workspace. And generally I'm thinking of a home office situation here. There are co-working spaces. If you're, in a larger metropolitan area, you may want to look into co-working spaces, although that's, in fact, now that I'm thinking about that, the idea is to stay at home. So I think we're talking purely about a work at home situation here, because you obviously don't want to be out and having contact with other folks. So generally we talk about a good, I'm sort of using air quotes here, good internet connection is 3 megabits or better. That's on the low end. I sort of did some Googling online, and that's what Google says is considered a good internet connection. That's sort of a base level just to be able to do basic email. You'll be able to connect to a virtual meeting. You probably won't be able to use video. You'll be able to use sound and hear other folks, but you probably won't be able to stream have a stable video connection with that level of the internet. So I would say something closer to 10 megabits per second is probably what you're going to want. Camera. Camera's not a you don't have to have a camera, but when we talk about good virtual communication, a camera is a necessity. I think Zoom did a survey, and they found that interaction and communication increases by like 70% when folks have a camera and they actually turn it on. So just from a communication standpoint, if you can see someone, you're going to have a better communication experience with that person. Obviously, microphone and/or headset. Generally, a headset is preferred. So I've got a headset on. You can see here, and you notice I've got this little mic, and if I talk into it, you can hear how clear that is. So generally, the audio is going to be better if you've got a headset. A lot of folks don't like to wear one, but so it's good for a couple reasons. Number one, the audio is generally better from a microphone than what it is if you've got a laptop or some type of internal microphone on the computer you're on. Also the fact that you've got a headset on, you very likely are going to be at your home. You may have kids there. You may have a spouse who's also trying to work from home too. So that's just going to cut down on the interruptions you're going to make to other folks you might be sharing a space with. And generally a microphone like this, an external one like this, it's going to pick up less background noise than one that's on your computer. So generally, a microphone or headset is nice to have if you can get one. And then appropriate workspace. I've got a home. I'm in my home office now. This is a separate space that we have that I work out of. You may not have that luxury, but certainly if you have a separate room in your house where you can go, it's just a good strategy to have. It also, from a work-life balance and a separation standpoint, like I generally only go into space when I'm working, and when I'm outside of this space, I don't work. So it does help from a mental standpoint just to have, okay, that's my workspace, but I live, and my personal life is in this other space. So there are certainly advantages to having an appropriate workspace set up. Okay, let's talk about software. So I'm just thinking about the software, and again, I'm keeping this very broad. I'm generally going to try to stay away from talking about specific software products. So these are just sort of general software tools that you're going to want to need and have to work remotely. So obviously, email is the first one. I mean, we communicate with that all the time in a normal office environment. So you're certainly going to need that in a virtual environment. Calendaring. So I wanted to mention this. So like at E-Extension, we use the Google suite of tools, G Suite. And so we use Google Calendar for all of our meetings that we have. A lot of people still work from a written. My wife is that way. She works at a higher ed institution. She's always used a written, paper type calendar, and she likes that, and that works for her. Generally in a virtual environment, you want to use electronic calendaring. The idea there is if I set a meeting up, I'm going to go in there and invite people based on their email, and they get a notification that says, hey, you've been invited into this meeting. You're going to also maybe include a virtual link there. Either if it's a phone conference, you might include a phone number in the location. If it's using a virtual tool like Zoom or Skype, you're going to include the appropriate link there. So again, from a virtual standpoint, calendaring and good calendaring skills and etiquette is a must in a virtual environment. Just to sort of contrast that, it's generally poor etiquette to just send an email to somebody and say, hey, let's meet at this time, and here's the link or the phone number. The sort of appropriate way to do it is to send them a calendar invite. It's very easy to say, if I say let's meet Monday at 2 p.m., if you don't include Eastern time there, if you have people in different time zones, it's difficult to have miscommunication about a time and a place and those kinds of things. So good calendaring skills generally takes care of those things for you. So I've got, of course, video conferencing here too. So I'm listing Hangouts, Zoom, and Skype here. Cisco WebEx is also an option some folks might have, but really any of these tools is going to work for you from for a meeting standpoint. And we'll talk about webinars a little later, but just generally one-on-one or even up to, so Zoom limits their meetings to about 100 participants, and I think that's probably standard. So most of these are going to handle, they're going to easily handle a dozen or more folks in a meeting room. There are free options for all of these. I've got a slide where I'll talk about some of the costs that are associated with them. But again, you'll want video conferencing in place too. And then any other specific software or packages that you might use. There may be something specific with your job that you're using that's not a sort of general piece of software. But again, if it's a situation where you're either trying to set a new machine up, just keep in mind that any of those software packages that you've got installed at work, that are going to be critical for your job, you're going to want to put those want to make those accessible on any new computer that you might set up. And keep in mind there too that you might need to work with your local network administrator to get access to those tools. It might not be something that you can just go online and download. You may need to work with your local IT folks or network administrator to get access to those pieces of software. Okay, data access. So when I'm mentioning data access, I'm thinking about files, and so those files can live on the local computer. Again, I mentioned if it's a situation where you've got a local, maybe a desktop computer at work that you can't bring home, and you're trying to work with a personal laptop, or you're setting a new computer up, any local files that live on that machine, you're not going to have access to. So that's something you're going to need to think about and plan for. Some options there might be cloud storage, things like Dropbox or Google Drive. You can maybe move those files there. That will give you access to them from another computer. Network data, so there may be private networks that you work on at your local office that you may or may not have access to outside of the office. So you'll need to, really when you get at that level, you need to talk to your local IT administrator about getting access to those files. It may be a situation where they can give you access to the network outside of the office, or again, you may need to move some of those files to a USB thumb drive or some type of remote service like Dropbox or Google Drive. There's some security issues there too, and I'll mention that a little later. So cloud data, again, I mentioned Dropbox and Google Drive. Generally, those things are accessible via web browsers, and you probably already have access to those all outside of your office setting. But again, you just want to be aware of where these files live, and if you'll have access to them from home. So I mentioned security too. Anytime we're talking about data access, you'll want to think about that. Again, that's too far in the weeds for us to get into here, but you'll want to consult with your local IT folks about that. And just think, if you'll just sort of think about it on your own. Obviously, any data that you're dealing with that contains any sensitive data, email addresses, social security numbers, home addresses, phone numbers, anything like that. I mean, you sort of know if it has that kind of data in it that you really need to think about how you make that accessible. Certain files you may only want to live on your local computer, or they may only live on the local network, and you don't want to put them out in a cloud in a cloud setting where they're accessible via a web browser. So again, those are just some of the things you want to think about. Password managers. So I mentioned LastPass, 1Password, and Bitwarden here. These are all free tools that allow you to manage passwords. You know, I only recently, I'm an IT guy, and only, I guess maybe 2 years ago, I started using LastPass, so it's been really handy for me. Most of us have more passwords most of us have more usernames and passwords than we can sort of keep in one place. So I would really highly recommend these tools. I'm actually making a transition to a new laptop now. It just so happened that I was given a new laptop about two weeks ago, and so I'm in the process of transitioning to that new laptop. But these tools, and for me, it's been LastPass has been invaluable in making that transition. It stores all of my username and passwords, and you log into a single site, and then there's a plugin that you use for your browser, and it basically takes care of all of your passwords for you. So really handy tool. And now might be a good timing. I think one of the upsides, or one of the advantages of us going through a scenario like we're going through now, where folks are being forced to work from home, is number one, it's gonna force us to learn some tools that we didn't previously know. But things like using password managers and things like that, I think it'll force us to start using those things. So long term, I think there's going to be a lot of advantages for us there. Okay, I'll go ahead and pause now. Larry, is there any questions or anything that I know there's been a lot of chat, and there's been a lot going on in Q&A. Is there anything that we should address at this time?
Yeah, there's a couple here, Mark. I've been answering a number of them online as they've come through, but A couple of questions, or a question about headsets, for example. If you have any kind of recommendation on something to buy, something that works good, or whether wireless headsets, whether there's any concern about those as you're going along.
So I use this is a Logitech that I've got. Generally, they're considered to be a good brand and a good value for the price too. This is, yeah, some of you may have noticed, this is a wireless headset that I really love this a lot. And I'll put a link. Probably what we'll do is we're going to take some of these questions. We'll have a follow-up email maybe with folks, and we'll put some recommendations in place. But yeah, the nice thing, many of you have probably used wired headsets before, and of course the wires are always getting in the way, and you can see I'm using my hands a lot here. So it's nice, the wireless headset, because you don't have any wires to get tangled up in. But I'll tell you, you don't need to go out and spend a lot of money. I keep my iPhone earbuds handy here, and iPhone earbuds work great. If I'm out, if I'm away from my home office here, I keep a set of those inside my backpack, and anytime I'm online, I use those, and the sound quality is great, and even the tiny microphone that's on there works great too. So,
and I'll add to that as well, Mark, that I don't use a headset at all. Depends on the sensitivity of the microphone in your computer. I'm on a MacBook, and I have no need for using a headset when I'm sitting here right in front of it.
Sure.
Another question has to do with requests from local community members about hosting online classes. Is Zoom the best method to do this, or should we use Facebook Live in private groups?
So, right. So that's really going to depend on your situation. I know. And again, my wife is in higher ed. She's an English professor at the local university here in Asheville. And in fact, she was on a staff meeting, her first remote staff meeting, right before I started this one. And she was commenting on some of her coworkers were they were really having come up to speed quickly with this whole online thing. So online instruction, obviously, it's too broad of a topic for us to get into here. However, I'll say that yes, all of those things are fine. It really just depends on what you want to do and how robust you want that experience to be. As Larry mentioned, Moodle is an option that's there. I guess we can put a plug in for campus.extension.org. That may be an option for folks. You can contact Larry about that. But there are a lot of tools. Again, Zoom is a great way to do it. I had someone contacted me prior to the webinar asking about just like not having any synchronous classroom time where other folks would join, but she just wanted to record herself giving a lecture and maybe do some screen sharing. Zoom is an excellent product for that. It allows you to start a meeting up. You can be the only one on, and then you can record yourself as well as recording the screen share you're doing. So it works well for that. Someone mentioned Facebook, or Larry mentioned Facebook Live too. That's a nice way to get a recording out there. That sort of wraps everything up in one piece. You're going to do the recording, and at the same time, it's going to post it live. Now, there's some limitations there. Obviously, with Facebook, it goes directly to Facebook. You don't necessarily have time to edit and maybe do various things to it, whereas with Zoom or some other tools, you do. So there are many options out there, and there's a lot of information out on the web. So I would encourage folks to sort of Google and look and see what's out there. I'm happy to take questions via email. I'll put my email in before the webinar is over with, and if folks have questions, you can contact me.
So with that, why don't you go on, Mark?
Okay.
I'm handling the rest of them, I think.
Okay, great.
There's a lot of them coming in, so we'll see.
Sure. Okay, and I was gonna say, we don't necessarily have a time limit. So if we go over our 1 hour that we have allotted, we can stay on for quick questions. Okay, so the next thing I had here was communication in general. So we've already talked about email. That one sort of goes without saying. I think most see the value there, and you know what that is. So chat is one too. So I've listed Google Chat and Slack here. So Slack is a chat tool that we use here at Extension. I tell folks, I describe it as sort of chat on steroids. It's sort of it is a chat tool, but it's a lot more than that. You can actually do video conferencing inside Slack if you want. It's also sort of used as an archive tool too. You can upload documents to it and do things like that. So think about that. If you have a sort of discrete group of folks, so Slack teams are free. You can create a Slack team for free, and they've got a sort of tiered pricing model such that, I think if it's less than maybe 50 members, you can add up to 50 members to a Slack team, and it's free. There are some limits on history, how long it saves history and things like that on the free account. But it's a very robust way to, if you want sort of a more synchronous experience with people. So just to give people that background too, you may hear the terms, and I think a lot of people are going to learn the terms synchronous and asynchronous when we talk about remote work. And so what those terms mean is, when we talk about asynchronous communication, we're talking about things like email, and then even chat in some ways can be asynchronous too. So someone's not necessarily live on the other end of the conversation you're having. So that's the asynchronous part. Synchronous is live communication, similar to what we're having now. You're hearing me speak live, and then even inside chat and Q&A, you're interacting with other folks there live. So that's the sort of synchronous versus asynchronous part. So generally we talk about the async part. So generally in a live office environment, that is all synchronous work. But remote work is very asynchronous. So you may send someone a message, and it may be an hour or 5 hours or a day before you hear back. So it's a different way to work. It's work such that you're not waiting on someone. Also, when we talk about asynchronous work, you're working in such a way that you're not dependent on someone else to sort of move forward with tasks that you're doing. Now, that's not always possible, but that's that sort of asynchronous mindset. So anyway, chat is a part of that. Again, Google Chat is free. Anything that I mentioned here that is Google, whether it's G Suite, Gmail, anything like that, is going to require a Google account for that. So it's free, but just know that you'll have to create a Google account to have access to those things. Calendaring, I already talked about some. Again, that's just, and I'll talk about virtual. You'll hear me probably mention virtual etiquette multiple times here. So just like there's etiquette inside your live office space, there's sort of etiquette, there's proper etiquette in a virtual environment too. And so again, calendaring is one of those things that I talk about a lot when I talk about good virtual etiquette. And that is using, if you're going to plan on meeting with someone, you probably send them an email first and establish a time you want to meet. And then once you've established a time, then you're going to send them a calendar invite that's going to include a virtual link, either a phone number if it's a phone conference, or if it's going to be a virtual face-to-face meeting, you're going to include a Zoom link or a Google Hangout link or something like that. And again, that person can see, okay, I've got an invite, I've got the time there that we're going to meet. Generally, these tools, calendaring tools, are going to time adjust based on the time zone where that person's located, so there's no question about that. So again, that's part of good virtual etiquette. Video conferencing, again, I've talked about that some. Asynchronous is good, but synchronous is still the gold standard, and the next best thing to meeting someone live in person is to meet them virtually online this way. Obviously there's a lot that you pick up on folks when you can see their face, you can hear the inflection in their voice, all those things come together for from a communication perspective to make things better. Okay, so that's the short end of the home workspace and setting up your workspace at home part. I'm going to get into the weeds a bit more here with regard to meetings versus webinars, live virtual events, those kinds of things. I'll go ahead and pause again now. Larry, any questions that we want to take?
Let's see. Yeah, there was a question from Julie Smith. I usually use Zoom for web meetings and have used Microsoft Teams a little without major hitches. I have some other associates who are requesting that I join meetings by Skype. In the past, I've had trouble joining other meetings like Zoom after being on Skype. Do you have any suggestions for ensuring that it's accessible to Zoom again after you've gotten off of Skype? You had any experience with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've used, so that does bring up a good point that, again, we're so as cooperative extension professionals, we're dealing with people all around the country, and even though we're all part of the cooperative extension service, we know that the tools and services vary from county to county, from state to state, from region to region. So be prepared to be flexible with regard to the tools that you use. Again, I mentioned at the extension we use Zoom, so when I send somebody a calendar invite for virtual meeting, it's going to be in Zoom because that's what we have licenses for, and that's the tool that we use. But I sometimes meet with folks who use Slack and WebEx and other tools. So that brings up a good point that we need to be flexible there. With regard to that specific question, Larry, I don't have any, sometimes you can run into some weird things where maybe you use Zoom and, you know, the software in Zoom has sort of control over the microphone or the video, and then maybe when you're going to join a Skype meeting, there's some weirdness there. So you may, just the only suggestion I would have, one thing to try is maybe making sure you actually shut down and kill Zoom so it's not running as a background process. Maybe it's possible that Zoom or some other tool is running in the background and has access to the microphone or the video or some other hardware that's on your computer, and that's causing issues with the other software you're using. Any other questions, Larry?
Yeah, I just want a few more that I'll be able to answer here through the Q&A in just a minute. But you know, what's the best option to host a webinar with teenagers who are limited to Chromebooks or iPads? You have any idea about that?
Mm-hmm. So I think all of these tools work with Chromebooks. You know, Chromebooks are generally networked. There's no hard drive. There's no physical hard drive on those, on the laptop themselves. But these tools don't. I mean, they generally are all web-based. They're based, you know, they work inside your web browser. So all of these tools should work with Chromebooks fine. And again, it's just going to be personal preference there with regard to what specific piece of software you want to use. You know, I will say on that point though, sometimes it's good to settle on a technology and say, okay, I'm going to just learn to use this, and that's what I'll be an expert at. Sometimes it's just a matter of making a decision on a particular tool you're going to use and going with that, because like I tell folks, Zoom is it's not rocket science, but there's enough bells and whistles there that it's certainly very sophisticated software. And it's the kind of thing, if you haven't used it a lot in the past, or maybe you've used it, but you've used it sparingly, then you're not going to know where all the little check boxes and dings and things are to turn things off and on. So again, I would invest a little time, you know, spend a day or two doing some research, but sort of make a decision, because I mean, generally it's like the old thing of, you know, what's the best kind of truck, Ford or Chevy? Well, they're generally both going to do all the same things. It's more of a style thing. So most of these packages I'm discussing here, the software I'm discussing, all will do, you know, most of the big things you need to do. It's just maybe a matter of style or how they do it. And then of course cost, there may be some cost things, and I'll talk some more about that. But again, any of these tools should be able to do those things.
And Mark, I have one more if you got time for one.
Yeah.
From Don Schumann. This is actually my first Zoom experience. I'm administrative support, do not normally conduct meetings or webinars. My concern is the possibility of having access through a remote desktop program so I can access my files. I do not have the software I use at work on my home computer.
Yeah, I had one slide, and I was considering mentioning remote desktop software, but that is certainly an option for folks. So another option, so I mentioned this scenario where maybe you've got a desktop computer at work, but you're not able to physically remove that desktop from your office location and bring it home. There is remote desktop software out there, and essentially it's a client, it's a piece of software you're going to install on your computer at work, and it's going to allow remote access to that computer. And it's a very robust experience. I mean, it's just like being there. When you generally, the way these software packages run is when you log into that computer, you're going to have a window that's going to be your desktop, just like you were at that live computer, and you'll be able to access all the same files you would at work. Now, again, the big thing, and as a software professional and as a previous desktop support and IT administrator, I can tell you that security is always the big concern there. I mean, these programs are very secure, and there's no issue with that, but you just want to, I would say you want to make sure you're clearing this with your local IT folks, make sure that they know about it. I mean, you're probably going to have to go through them anyway. This software that I'm referring to, generally, unless you have administrative rights to your machine, you're not going to be able to install it yourself. But I would say that you'll want to check with those folks just from a security standpoint to make sure you're following protocol and there's no issues there.
Yeah. And I'll add one more in on you, since you mentioned the security thing here, Mark. There's 3 or 4 questions, and I notice also some discussion in the chat box about online password managers and how safe they are, what kind of risk there is, what kind of costs they might have, those kind of things. General thoughts about online password.
Yeah. So let me go back to, so this is last bullet point I've got here. So the 3 sort of big ones that are out there, there may be more, but LastPass, 1Password, and Bitwarden are 3 very popular ones. They're all very secure. I mean, as password management companies, password managing is what they do. So they're very focused on security. I mean, generally so the way these work is you set a single password up to be able to access these pieces of software online. And then you have a plugin for whatever web browser you're using. And when you go to a particular site, it knows based on the URL that, okay, I've already got a password saved in LastPass, let's say, and it'll automatically insert that password for you. So generally, I mean, this is what the recommendation is for password management from a security standpoint. Using these tools is more secure than most people. I mean, most of us default, and listen, I'm an IT guy and I did it for years. You basically got the same password for all of the accounts you've got. That's a very unsafe, that's a very unsecure way to manage passwords. These tools will allow you to randomly generate a good, a very, very secure password for all of the different sites you access, and then it saves them inside these tools. They're free. Generally, all of them have a free tier, so they start out free, and then if you want more features, then you can buy more features. I've been using LastPass, like I say, for about two years now. I'm still using the free version of that. I'm probably up to 100 different sites now, so I'm not sure if there's a limitation on the number of sites, but there's some more advanced things with regarding to adding notes and other things. There's some secure vault type things that you can do that are paid services, but generally the free version of these tools is very robust, and again, using these tools is going to be more secure than either, again, most of us, the default is to use the same password for all of the sites that we access, or you're trying to write them down and on some kind of in some kind of written source or something like that, which is obviously not secure. So okay, so let's talk about meeting versus webinar. This is I guess 2 parts. This is sort of going to address just the virtual communication part with either clients or other teammates that you want to communicate with. And then also when we talk about online instruction, I know many folks we've got that are thinking about online instruction and trying to develop an online curriculum for various things that they're doing. I think this will address that. So first, let's address this idea of a meeting versus a webinar. So meetings, everyone has live audio and video versus a webinar has view-only attendees. So for instance, as an example, you're on a webinar now. Myself and Larry have live audio and video. However, the folks that are joining us here, Zoom calls those folks attendees. You all don't have live audio and video. You don't have that ability on this call. Now you do have the ability to communicate with us via chat and Q&A, but those are the sort of 2 general chunks that I sort of put. I put these tools in as their ability to do meetings versus webinars, and we'll look at how that breaks down for the various tools in the next slide. But so you'll want to think about, one of the first things you'll want to think about, whether it's online instruction or just meeting with staff members, or this idea of meeting versus a webinar. Generally, if it's a staff type setting, a meeting is going to be the appropriate thing you're going to want to use there. Obviously, in a situation like that, you want everybody to have live audio and video, and that generally has the highest level of interaction with other folks on the call. A webinar is going to be helpful more in a situation like this. We've got, we've got 483 people that are actually on this webinar right now. If all of you are on and we had live audio and video, I mean, it would be fine. The technology can handle it, but obviously the chance of someone turning an open microphone on and there being some kind of disruption that might happen is going to be much higher in a scenario like that. In fact, my initial plan for this webinar was for it to be a meeting, so everybody would have live audio and video. We could have a conversation, and I could allow people to ask questions. When I came in yesterday, I noticed there were 300 and some, and then, like I say, prior to it, we had over 500 that were registered. I think right before the webinar started, and so I switched it to a webinar rather than it being a meeting, just because I think the experience is going to be better for folks. But those are sort of the two types of virtual interaction that you can have with folks. And then again, for a webinar, panelists like myself have live audio and video. Attendees are view only. Okay, let's talk about meetings first. So again, from just meeting with your colleagues kind of thing, if you have a client who's in another location, you want to meet with them virtually, some of your options are going to be Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts is free. You will have to have a Google account to use Google Hangouts. You can create a Gmail account that can be a Google account. You can also use your existing email account to create, I think they call it I think a Google account is what they call that. But rather than you having your name at gmail.com, it can be you can use your institutional email if you want and create a Google account. And then that allows you to use all these other tools and services that Google has. Google Hangouts is one of those tools. They also have the G suite of tools, which is Google Docs, Google Sheets, which is similar to Excel. And so there's a whole suite of tools there that once you create a Google account, it's going to give you access to all those things. So Zoom, I've talked about that somewhere on a Zoom meeting now. So Zoom, just a very robust tool. I mean, what I tell people is one of the things I like about Zoom is, Zoom only does virtual communication. It only does the tool that we're on now. Whereas Google, we all know Google does a whole lot of things. They do search. Again, they've got a whole G suite of tools that includes, Word, Google Docs, Google Sheets. They've got a whole suite of things. Zoom only does virtual communication, so they're very focused on what they do, and so as a result of that, you get a very good product. So you can create a free. It's free to create an account in Zoom, and you can have unlimited one-on-one meetings with folks, and there's no time limit on those. So if it's just two folks on a call, there's no time limit. That's with the free account. If there is more than two, you've got a 40-minute time limit, which is actually not bad. I've got a free, my personal email. I've got a free version of Zoom that I use. And it's actually nice to have that 40-minute time limit. I mean, many times you don't, if you're going more than 40 minutes, then you're probably not running a very efficient meeting. So just keep in mind that with the free account, you can have up to 100 people on a Zoom meeting, and as long as you stay within that 40-minute time limit, then it's fine. And you can actually end. I've done it where if I was using my personal account, you can end the meeting and then hop right back on to the full 40-minute counter starts over again. And it's also very user-friendly to them. I think you get a warning at the 30-minute mark, so that can be an option for folks. If you want to actually use the paid account, you can get a pro account for $15 a month. That gives you access to again, meetings up to 100 participants, and there's no time limit on those meetings. And the recording part, I think the recording is not. I think if you're using the free account, you don't get recording, although I might be wrong on that. But again, there's some limitations beyond what I've mentioned here, there's some other limitations that there might be on the free account. But I'd encourage you to check with your home institution. Most of us with the cooperative extension are tied to some university in their state. Many universities are using Zoom, so check with them and see what their licensing plans are, because you very well may be able to get a pro account through Zoom. And then, yeah, I mentioned the ability to record too. So Skype is another option. It's free. I don't know if there's any paid. I haven't used Skype a ton, so I don't know if there's any. I'm sure there is some paid option that you can have there, but generally I know Skype is free. And I know there's maybe some limitations on recording and things like that, but I know if you just want to do video communication where you want to have a conversation with someone, Skype's very robust and will do much of what you would want to do. And then WebEx I mentioned as an option here too. I haven't used WebEx much. I've been on their meetings before. I know they've got webinar options, but again, WebEx may be another option. There may be your home institution may have a paid WebEx account that you'd be able to use. So let's talk about webinars. So Google Hangouts is not going to be an option for webinars. And again, webinars are going to be where you have speakers who have live audio and video, and you have view-only attendees. However, you can broadcast live to YouTube is sort of would be a substitution for maybe what a traditional webinar is. Now, obviously, the issue you run into there is YouTube is not, you can't limit who can see that. I think generally that's going to be out there for the public to view, which might not be what you're looking for. So Zoom, so you're on a Zoom webinar now. So Zoom has the option to do webinars. You have to have a webinar license to do that. That starts at $150 a month. I think that's for 500 participants, and then it goes up there. I think you can go up to maybe 10,000 participants or attendees if you want to. And they've got a scaled they've got a scaled licensing option for that. So Skype too. Again, I'm not sure on Skype. Again, Microsoft purchased Skype many years ago. It's part of the 365 suite now, I think. So you'll have to sort of check on that and see what the options are there. And then WebEx, I know, does have a webinar option. I don't have any. I just didn't have time to do research on pricing and things like that for WebEx. And then Facebook Live is an option too. So again, that's going to be similar to the broadcasting live with YouTube. It's a great way to get a video out there. If you want, you can broadcast live to a specific group on using Facebook Live, or it can be on a public feed, but it's a nice way to get a recording out there. And I think Facebook has the ability to link to, you can embed a video, so you can treat Facebook video a lot like you can YouTube, in that you can get a specific link and you can share that link with people or embed it in another page. So Facebook Live is another option there. And in fact, I think you can do, generally Facebook Live is only a single person, although I think there are options to bring multiple people in too. But there's going to be some limitations there as far as having panelists, like true panelists and those kinds of things. So those are things you want to look into. Okay, so so I'll go ahead and pause now. I'm going to talk about managing a remote workforce here. I've just got a single slide. But Larry, any questions that we want to address?
Now, let me scroll up here a second. There's one. Someone put in, do you recommend one avenue to provide education online? I've been using VoiceOver on PowerPoint, but have not found a good place to post it. I tried utilizing Facebook and YouTube, but it takes forever to upload, and I have not been successful in uploading the material. So if you have something like a VoiceOver on PowerPoint, what might be a good way to?
Yeah, I mean, you really need, and I see what you're saying. So for all of this sort of hinges on you having a website or some public place to post things, right? Facebook is an option, but that's sort of a clunky way to do it. And so I don't have a good answer for you right off. You really need either, again, I mentioned campus.extension.org that we host, but again, that's not free. That's going to be cost. So there's not a lot of free options that are just out there. You might want to contact your home institution and see if they have a way that they could either create a website or give you some space. There are a lot of free options out there if you have. It really depends on the technical level you're at. I mean, Google Sites, I think, is a option that's been around for many years, but that allows you to essentially create I think you need to know HTML to do that and manage that, but that could be that could be an option. If you know WordPress also, I think WordPress.org, you can create a free WordPress site there. So if you're willing to sort of bone up from a technical standpoint and learn WordPress, that could be an option. So you're just going to have to get creative when it comes to sort of finding a place for stuff to live, where you can put all the bits and pieces. As you mentioned, a PowerPoint, like you're saying, you really just need a place to host that file, but then you also generally want some supporting documentation and some instruction and those kinds of things. So you're really going to need to either, again, if you have the technical ability yourself, there's some free options out there, or again, contact your home institution and see if they can give you any support.
Yeah, just a couple more here, Mark, if you have a chance. Sejal Lanterman says, we meet with volunteers often who have limited tech experience. What seems to be an option for streaming meetings instead of having to download software?
So that's tough. When you say stream, if you want to stream live, you're generally going to have to, well, again, so something like either Facebook Live or YouTube Live are going to be options there. You can stream. There's nothing they needed to download there. You can share a URL with them, and they should just be able to click on that URL. It's going to open a web browser up, and they'll be able to. Again, they're going to see a live stream. So that's one option. The other is just from a recording standpoint. So generally all of these tools in some way now, they may not always be free. Some may be free versus paid, but generally all these tools are going to give you the ability to record, and then you're going to get something like an MP4 file, and then you can upload that to YouTube and then share a link of the recording with folks. So what I would tell people is don't get stuck in this idea of it having to be live. If there's just information that you want to get out there to people, it being live and synchronous is nice, but it's not always critical. And many times it's much easier, again, for you to just record yourself, similar to what I'm doing here, where I'm sharing my screen so you can create a PowerPoint. And again, Zoom is a tool that will allow you to do that. You can create a PowerPoint. In this case, I'm using Google Slides, which is free. Create a slide presentation, open up a meeting in Zoom. You're the only one in that meeting. Share your screen, record it. When you record in Zoom, it has what I call the Brady Bunch box, which is the image of your camera, and then you've got the larger image of the screen you're sharing. Make that recording and then upload that to YouTube, and then share that link with whoever you want to get this information out to. So something like that's a completely free option that's not going to cost you a dime to do, and there's not anything terribly technical about it. So that's there's a lot of creative. If you're willing to be creative and put a little time into it, there's a lot of free options out there that'll work well.
Mark, do you have any experience with the Zoom through the browser?
So Zoom doesn't really work through the browser. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So Zoom has a very small footprint, a very small piece of software that's installed locally. All of you who are on this call now, you've got that Zoom. If this was the first time you use Zoom, you probably got a prompt about installing a piece of Zoom software. Now you access the links through the browser, but that in turn actually calls that local software that's installed locally on your computer. So I don't know if that answers the question for whoever asked it, but when you say Zoom through the browser, that's not really the case. Again, you're accessing the link through the browser, whether it be through email or some other method, but that when you click that link, it actually kicks off that local software that actually spins up.
But everybody needs to download it. And then there's somebody who had a question, Chris Garcia was asking about whether we need to download VPN software for any reason.
Mhm. So you may need to, again, that's probably applicable for when I talked about your local network files. So if you've got a local area network back at your office that you have files on there, you may have a scenario if you want to access that local network from outside of that network, so from your home computer or some other location, then yeah, you very well may be instructed by your local network and IT folks to install or set up a VPN, which is a virtual private network is what that is. Essentially, that allows you to, it's often referred to as a tunnel too. It gives you this sort of secure tunnel to be able to access that network remotely.
That's all for now, Mark. Go ahead.
So yeah, I've got a couple more slides. And again, we're going a little long here, so feel free to leave if you have to. We're going to be recording this, and we'll make it available within the next couple of days. So you can certainly come back and watch it if you need to. So I just wanted to put one slide in on managing a remote workforce here. There may be folks who are administrators out there who you've got a sort of different set of concerns. So that's going to allow you to let your employees work remotely. So I wanted to do at least one slide on sort of addressing some issues there. So these are just sort of some more strategies in general. So managing a remote workforce is very different than managing a physical one. And so some of the things, these are some of the things to think about there. So again, engaging regularly one-on-one. So this applies in a physical setting, but maybe even more so in a virtual setting. You really want to know what's going on with folks, and interacting with them virtually is a great way to do that. So I would recommend, at least in the short term, engage and interact with the folks one-on-one, even if it's just a short 15-minute meeting once a week or so. Check in with them, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a video conference like this. I would recommend that if you got the technology to do it, but a phone call would suffice too. But make sure you're communicating with those folks, find out how they're doing. All of this is new to us. It's going to be new to you as a manager, but it's also new to many employees too. So again, engage with them regularly, one-on-one. Weekly virtual staff meetings, I would say that's a good idea. So at E-Extension, we've got a weekly staff meeting that's on the calendar. We don't have that meeting every week. In fact, we generally probably meet regularly more bi-weekly than on a weekly basis, but we sort of got that time reserved on the calendar every week. And we'll, if we don't need to meet, then we'll cancel that meeting, but it's sort of a standing meeting that we have. But I would recommend, a weekly virtual staff meeting is a good place to start. You may want to start off with just a phone conference in the beginning, and then if you can transition to virtual meetings where you've got live audio and video, that would be a smart way to go. And just, also just to mention too, all of these options I've mentioned for virtual meetings, Zoom, Skype, all these things generally have a call-in number. So people can join the way we're joining now with all live audio and video, but if somebody needs to call into that meeting, they can also call in too. So I've got here goals, not activities. So as a manager managing a remote workforce, again, it's very different than someone being present. There is an ability to sort of have eyes on somebody and sort of see what they're doing in an office setting, whereas in a virtual environment, you don't have the ability to do that. So in a virtual environment, as a manager, you really want to focus on goals, not activity. And then I've also got here sort of presence versus focusing on performance rather than presence. Now the sort of obvious next step or question is, people have to know what they're accountable for, and from a communication standpoint, they have to sort of know what their responsibility is and what the expectations are if you're going to focus on goals and not sort of activity or looking busy. So you really need to think about that. Again, if this is just a short-term thing, you can get by for a couple of weeks. People sort of know what they're supposed to do. But certainly if this thing stretches out a month or two months, you really need to think about your workforce. Is it clear? Does everyone know what their responsibilities are? And make sure you've got a way to communicate to communicate those goals with them. That's going to decrease your stress as a manager, and it's also going to decrease their stress as employees. People are happier when they know what it is they're supposed to do, and they're doing that. People are very stressed, and obviously in times like this, we need as little stress as possible, but people are more stressed when it's unclear what they should be doing and what a particular expectation is. So again, goals, not activity. And then trust is the last thing. Really, in a remote situation, you've got to trust that employees are going to do what they're supposed to do. And again, that a lot of that hinges on them having an understanding of what their responsibilities are and what the expectations are. Okay. All righty. So just got, I think, maybe 2-3 slides left here. So you've heard me talk about good virtual etiquette or virtual presence. I've got a couple things that are sort of on that topic. So number one is turn video on for meetings. At E-Extension, we like to say we're a video on. We have a video on culture here, which is it's typical when we're on virtual meetings like this. It's sort of expected you're going to have your video on. Again, the interaction you have with others is going to increase when video is on. There are nuances that you're going to be able to pick up when you can see people's face, see their expressions, rather than if they've got their video on. And this is not, this is the standard when it comes to remote work, but there are many companies. We've got some outside groups that we work with that don't generally, when we're on video calls with them, they don't turn their video on. So it's not uncommon to do that. But I would encourage you that even if other folks aren't doing it and there's a meeting you're on, turn your video on. I think it's going to increase, make the experience better for you and others. Mute yourself. I really should have this one first. So obviously we've all seen the old joke of there's a video conference or even a phone conference going on and someone is not on mute and the dog is barking in the background, or you've got all kinds of noise. So generally the default is that anytime you're on a video conference, if you're not talking, go ahead and put yourself on mute. It's generally, generally the way things go is maybe the person who's leading the meeting, they would they're not on mute the entire time because they've got a big part in the talking that they're doing. But generally you want to be on mute if you're not addressing a specific topic. Now the obvious thing you have to remember is, that's the old joke too, we've seen people, when you see someone's mouth moving but you can't hear anything, is you have to remember to unmute yourself when it comes time to talk. But again, in general, you want to be very careful about muting yourself. Be available. I've got two. So be available means, obviously in a virtual environment, the tools you're using, whether it's email, whether it's Slack, those things, you want to respond to people. Just because you're working in an asynchronous environment doesn't necessarily give you license to let things go. In fact, I would say even more so in an asynchronous environment, you want to address things as soon as possible. So I've generally got a 4-hour rule for any emails that I get. If it's somebody internal to E-Extension who needs something, I sort of have a 4-hour rule. I'm going to respond back to everybody within 4 hours, even if I can't give them the information that they want or address a specific thing. I'll just email them back and say, hey, I just want you to know I got your email, and I'll get this to you either as soon as I can, or maybe I'll give them a time frame on when I can get that thing to them. But you want to be available and be present too. So even though you're virtual, that doesn't mean you can't be present. So you can be present, based on the tools that you've got. I've mentioned calendaring before. Good. That's a big part. If we don't all have a process in place to reliably set up meetings and show up to those meetings and establish times, then the whole thing sort of falls apart. So calendaring is really the linchpin of virtual meetings and gatherings happening. So calendaring is important. Time zone awareness too. I mentioned that calendaring generally takes care of time zones. If it's 2 p.m. Eastern and I send it to somebody in Mountain Time, generally it will adjust on their end to be 12 p.m. Mountain Time. But if you're emailing back and forth with folks and maybe trying to set up a time in advance, it's generally good practice to always use time zones when you're referring to dates and times, just so folks are clear on when a particular time is. And then mobile devices too. So many of these tools have the ability to have mobile apps that complement them, and also the notifications that go along with those apps. So if you've got email on your phone, generally you want to turn the notifications on so you'll know if you've gotten an email. And again, everybody has to decide how available they want to be. As somebody who's worked in technology for 20 some years now, it's just sort of a part of how I work. But modern devices are very robust with regard to being able to manage notifications and when you get them. Generally I have mine, so after 10 p.m. at night, the notification will show up on my phone, but I don't get a ding or a sound alert or anything like that. And then I think they come on again at 7 o'clock. So you can get very granular on when you want to get notifications and how you get them. So I would say utilize those tools, utilize the apps. Many of the apps we use online also have apps that you can install on your phone, so you can work more efficiently with those tools. So I would encourage you to be aware of those things. And then finally, I have the virtual golden rule here. So the virtual golden rule is, and this is specifically with meetings and just being online virtually, is if you wouldn't do it in a real meeting or a physical office environment or meeting environment, don't do it virtually. So, if you're going to eat, if you've got a meeting scheduled and you're having lunch, and again, it depends on the meeting you're going to have. You might not necessarily bring your lunch to a more formal meeting, but if it's just a colleague you were going to meet that their cubicle's right in the next door, then it might be appropriate to have lunch. So those same rules sort of apply to virtual meetings too. I mean, one nice way to do it, and if you see here, I can turn my video off. I'll often turn my video off if I'm meeting, or if I get a phone call while I'm on a meeting, I'll generally turn my video off and mute myself while I'm on that phone call, so I'm not distracting other folks that are on the meeting. So again, but that virtual golden rule, always ask yourself, if it's a live meeting environment, if you wouldn't do it there, then don't do it on a virtual meeting. And then the final poll I've got here is we're thinking about doing a webinar like this on some tools and strategies for dealing with kids at home. I know I'm going through that now, so that's what made me think about it. So I'll launch this poll real quick. So are you balancing kids at home with work? And no, and then if you are, I've got some age ranges there. So if this is something you'd like to hear about, let us know. The other thing is, there's other topics you'd like to hear about, put those in chat. There's other topics you would like us to address, or even tools and services maybe that you feel like your local institution doesn't have. Let us know about those in chat. Okay. And I'll just take another 10 seconds maybe and let folks respond to this poll. Okay. So the results here, most of you are not dealing with kids at home. So, but we've got a few, it looks like there's at least 100 folks here who've got kids at home. So yeah, that was just one of the things we were considering. I know a handful of us at E-Extension have kids, and we're trying to deal with schools being closed. So, okay, so that's all I have for the formal presentation. Let's take some questions. Larry, what have we got?
Yeah, really just a kind of a final set of three here. Joanne Bankston is asking about suggestions for successfully marketing webinars and meetings to the general public. If whatever.
Yeah, so a couple things there. So learn.extension.org is an option for folks, although we're considering, we are actually in the process of transitioning from Learn possibly to another tool, but it's there now. So go check out learn.extension.org. That's the way now. What I caution people is just creating an event on learn.extension.org is not going to market your webinar for you. It's just sort of a place where you can put links, you can put a description to the event, you can include a link to it, but you've obviously got to still market it yourself. So some of the options are, so generally you're going to have to use your own personal network to do that. So, you know, one thing is, depending on the group it is you're trying to market it to, generally we have colleagues who are in that same circle. So obviously you want to share that event information with those folks. The way to do that, or an efficient way to do that, again, if you use a tool like, if you use something like Learn and create an event there, and even if you use Zoom, Zoom gives you the ability to create registration for a meeting. That gives you a link. You can share that link with those folks. If there are other groups that have a common interest with what the content is, so for instance, we did webinars for the U.S. Forestry Service in Utah State for many years. They also work with treefund.org and some other nonprofit groups. So generally, if we'd create a webinar that might have some content that was relevant to some of these nonprofit groups, we would email the webinar information to those folks, and then they would share it with their groups. So really using your sort of internal network, and then also contacting your home institution too, and find out if there's any groups, any relevant groups or email lists that you can share that with. But right, marketing is a hard part, because you can have the greatest content in the world. If people don't know about it, then it's really not, it's not getting out there to the people who need that. So, you know, also use tools like Facebook to go search for groups and things like that. Again, depending on what the content is, there may be some groups out there that you don't know about. And you know, feel free to send me an email also. I mean, I've been working at the extension for a little over 6 years now. So I've made a lot of contacts over those years. I know about groups. I might be able to put you in contact with some folks who might be interested in the content you're creating.
Yeah, somebody, Liz Beersdorfer was asking for your email address.
I thought about it. I just put that in Zoom now.
Oh, you put it in chat. Okay, good deal.
Yeah, or I'm sorry, in chat.
Okay, good deal. Another question, somebody wanted you to revisit what you said in terms of a good internet speed, good megabit per second speed.
So yeah, 3 megabits per second is going to be on the low end. That's the minimum you're going to want. And when I say minimum, I mean that's going to allow you to, you know, use a web browser, do email, things like that. You can most likely join a virtual meeting with that, whether it be Google Hangout or Zoom. Although your experience may not be great, you're probably not going to be able to use video in a scenario like that. So you can turn video off, and you should be able to hear others speak and also use the audio on your end. So 3 megabits per second is going to be a minimum. 10 megabits per second would be 10 megabits per second or better would be recommended. And I'll just tell you, I've got my connection at home. I've got pretty good internet. I've got probably around 150 megabits per second here, and I don't have a particularly high speed plan. That's just the basic, you know, that's just the basic speeds here. I mean, the other thing I would caution, and this is worth looking into too. For years, I had quote unquote slower internet. I was around 10 megabits per second, and I actually just started. I think the impetus for me was I wanted to stream video. I was looking at YouTube TV as the service provider I have. I dropped my cable and I used YouTube TV, and I was having some issues with speed there. Well, it turned out I had 100 megabits per second, but the older router I was using would only go up to 10 megabits per second. So I had a whole bunch of bandwidth that I was getting to my house, but the router and the wireless router that I was using was an older router, and it would only go, it had a 10 megabit per second max. So I say that to say, you know, either do some Google searching or contact your cable or internet provider, find out what your speed should be. If you just Google internet speed test, Google actually has their own internet speed tests. So if you just Google that, it'll bring up a small box, and you can actually click a button, and it'll test your speed and tell you how many megabits per second you're getting on your on the local wireless you're on. So, but yeah, find out from your cable company what your internet speed should be. Do an internet speed test and see, and it very well may be that you've got an older router or something like that in place that's limiting your speed.
And I guess one final one, there's a couple of other questions here, but I think we can handle those in the Q&A. But Cheryl Herrick was asking about how folks are handling informed consent or permissions for some of those that have public-facing options or webinars. So I guess that's for content that would be, you have to get permission to use certain kinds of content that you're going to present in a webinar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've got, yeah, so there's like the legal, I mean, I'm usually not a good, Larry and I have worked together long enough. He knows I'm probably not, I'm usually pretty liberal when it comes to stuff like that. So I mean, I can tell you from an etiquette standpoint, it's generally good if you're going to be using somebody's content to sort of ask them. Now, obviously, so I say that at the same time, anything that's publicly available out on the web, if it's publicly available anyway, you doing it inside of a webinar is not, you're not doing anything that someone couldn't find themselves. Now, again, it's generally good procedure to give credit. So if there's an image you're using or something like that, even though it's publicly available on the web, it's good to embed that. I mean, again, the right way to do it is to, embed that on the image, or if it's a particular set of content that you're using, it's good to give, attribution is what that's called. It's generally, you want to give attribution to the source, but it sort of depends on, a lot of it too is like, how much are you referencing? Is it just an image, or is there a whole set of content that you're basically taking from somewhere else and going to be using in a webinar or classroom setting or something like that? So, it never hurts to ask, and it never hurts, and it's generally the right thing to do to just ask folks. We regularly get requests to use some of the content that the extension is produced, and even though it's publicly available out on the web, folks still ask, and 99 times out of 100 we say yes. It's that's what it's there for, is for folks to use. So I'll stop there on that, as I'm not a lawyer.
Okay, well, just a couple of other things we have in here, but I think that's about all we need to handle in terms of live questions right now, Mark. So appreciate your.
All right, folks, we'll follow up again. I think I'm pretty sure we'll have this. So if you haven't been to virtual.extension.org, go there and check. We're putting all of the resources. We just, so first off, we're humbled. E-Extension is humbled by the fact that we've been contacted by many, many folks about working virtually and also getting content online and just dealing with all of the issues that we're faced with over the last few weeks. So we're thankful and we're humbled that folks are contacting us about that. And we want to do everything we can to support the cooperative extension service and your efforts to continue to work and continue to be efficient in the times we're going through now. So certainly contact us if there's something we're not doing you'd like to see us do. Let us know about that. We can't do everything, and there's many things that are going to be very specific that we just don't have the resources to do. But if we can do it in a very broad way, similar to what we're doing with this webinar, then definitely let us know about that. And again, go to virtual.extension.org. We're trying to house all of that content. Some of that content is in-house content that we have created at extension.org. Others is just folks that we support that are issues around remote work and various things like that. So we'll have a link to the recording there. Feel free to rewatch that or share it with other folks, and just keep doing what you're doing. This is, I think it's time to have empathy for ourselves. I think we're all dealing with a different world right now. And, aside from the fact that we can't go out to restaurants or watch our favorite basketball team or those kinds of things, but our work is also being disrupted too. So let's have empathy for ourselves, but thankfully we've got the tools, we've got the expertise and things like that in place to continue working and to make it through this time. So just be encouraged. All righty. Thanks folks. Bye-bye.